Thank you for coming. This is sort of remarkable. When you plan a program on ice cream in June, you don't expect it to be 50 degrees and people to be wearing winter coats, but I guess that's what you get for working in New England. This is the 5th program in our culinary history series. There is actually one more program left in the series that will be on June 15th at Mount Auburn Cemetery. Hopefully it will be a beautiful, balmy day, just to make up for the blizzard we had at the first program and the 50-degree day in June we had at this program. So this program is essentially looking at the area's unusual obsession with ice cream. And I think actually having the program on a cold day is kind of appropriate because Boston is known for having ice cream stores that are packed with lines at the door in January. My parents, who often attend programs but aren't able to make it today, often tell the story of the time that they went out to get ice cream and there was a big snowstorm and they trudged through the snow and they dragged along 2 little kids behind them and they went to Emack and Bolio's in Cambridge and the store was closed and they would never let the people who worked in the store forget it. And that was the blizzard of '78.
Oh my God.
So people in this area really do believe that you should go out for ice cream regardless of what is going on. So we have a wonderful panel tonight. Our moderator will actually introduce the rest of the panel, but I will introduce the moderator. We are lucky to have Kathleen Fitzgerald, who will moderate the program. She has written 3 books with her partner, who you met at our first program, Keith Stavely, and they've written 3 books on New England food history. They include United Tastes, the making of the first American cookbook, Northern Hospitality, Cooking by the Book in New England, and America's Founding Food, the story of New England cooking. They've also spoken on the subject at international conferences at numerous historical societies, libraries and museums, and a variety of community and professional groups. So without further ado, I will turn it over to our host.
Great, thank you very much, Gannon. Good evening, everyone. Tonight we'll hear from experts in food history and ice cream making about a much-loved regional specialty, as Gavin has been explaining to us, in case we needed it explained to us. But I'm going to make a few remarks first about sort of the backstory, as they now say, about ice cream. Though we might think ice cream has been perfected here in Boston and New England, it was not invented here. Ice cream derives from, in fact, from that cauldron of intellectual and physical exploration in the early modern period that ushered in the world of global exchange and invention in which we still live and from which we still benefit. Enthusiasm for new and rare goods drove explorers and traders to far-flung places and brought back Asian and Middle Eastern and New World fruits, spices, animals, plants, and ideas to Europe. There was a growing appetite for all kinds of knowledge, and through the use of rational methods of observation and repeatable experiments, many of the innovations that we take for granted, including the once seemingly impossible fabrication of ices and ice creams, it's really seemed impossible to people to have food this cold, were then developed. Migration and exploration, on a more personal level, also played a part in furthering the story of ice cream locally. Several of the key persons on the panel tonight came to Boston and Massachusetts to pursue education and stayed to make innovation and remarkable food, as I think we all have just experienced. But so much greater than a sum of its parts is ice cream that the word alchemical has been used to describe the ingenious combination of technology, physics, and kitchen technique that led to its invention. I think it does seem almost alchemical that 17th century Neapolitan inventors could use crushed ice or compacted snow and salt or saltpeter. These were things that had been known in kitchens since antiquity, to freeze cream or milk mixed with flavors as exotic as sugar, rare fruits, nuts, and other foods, and turn them into something cold but soft, ice cream. Quite soon, the Neapolitan specialty found its way to the tables of the Medici, the French court, and across the channel to the English court. But for many, many centuries, it was so expensive to procure and keep the essential component, ice, and so costly to acquire sugar and fine fruits and rare nuts that sweetened and flavored the ice cream, that ice cream remained sort of a specialty or almost a pet of European high society. Yet, just as the passion for the new rarities recognized no national or regional boundaries, so too these desirable commodities recognize no social borders. And ice cream, like other luxuries, found its way from the banquet tables of the princes and nobles to those of the merely incredibly wealthy. That was the next stop. And from there down to the homes of urban merchants, country doctors, and eventually to anyone who could afford to pay for the privilege. In its earliest American versions, ice cream retained the faintly aristocratic airs that were a legacy of its European beginnings. Take ice cream as it was first experienced at summertime leisure spots in the late 19th century in America, places like Atlantic City, New Jersey, and Newport, Rhode Island, or Nantasket Beach, Massachusetts. American seaside resorts built buildings that were often in a style they called Oriental or Moorish styles of architecture. This was exoticism. It was designed to make people feel that they had come to someplace different from the everyday. And also for sale in these resorts on the boardwalk was, of course, ice cream. Cones that were for sale were filled with soft ice cream that was arrayed in kind of a swirling pattern. We know what we're talking about, swirling and ascending to a narrow peak so that those enjoying a day at the seaside, getting away, as it were, from the everyday, could feel that they were actually tasting the Moorish strangeness that they could see with their eyes in the architecture. In the first panel in our series, we learned that counterintuitively, Boston and American culinary history often proceeded from the elaborate to the simple, from refined to rustic, rather than the reverse. The elaborations of ice cream forms persist in some dishes, as we know. We have, very elaborate forms of ice cream. Sundaes are just the beginning. And also in a penchant for, shall we say, outlandish flavorings. But equally emphasized now are unadulterated ingredients and fresh ingredients. And in New England, there has always been a force, as we also, I think, intuitively know, that pulls against any trend that might otherwise go overboard in the direction of display and ornament. This penchant for plainness, as we might call it, is a part of our regional Puritan heritage, and one in which even Boston Irish, like me, have long participated. I remember growing up in the 1950s, and the pride of our north of Boston neighborhood was our local ice cream place. It was open only in summers. It was built very simply of wood, unadorned, without frills, and it was run by a local Yankee dairy farmer whose herd was kept not far away, and whose stern eye overlooking his operation and his cadre of servers, teenagers all, was the counterpoint to our enjoyment. There's a fly in every ointment. The European confectioners built follies at first with ices and ice creams, incredible pyramids and unusual shapes, all kinds of displays like hams and cheeses and fruits that were made of ices and ice cream. But we Americanized to something much simpler. I'm going to shamelessly steal a phrase from Emily Dickinson about New England ice cream and say, we see ice cream here New Englandly. As the great food writer Roy Andries de Groot, whom I've been reading recently, he was himself a European transplant and a former French nobleman who took American citizenship, has written, in each new place, recipes become something new. And the something new of ice cream's Boston and New England history is what our illustrious speakers will be telling us about tonight. From the ingenuity of 19th century Bostonians to the inventiveness that made Boston and Massachusetts the capital of ice cream and created the ice kings of the 70s, 80s, and into our own day. So the way we're going to proceed now is I'm going to introduce our first speaker and then introduce each speaker as he and she speaks. I'd like to begin by telling you a little about Jeri Quinzio. She's a longtime member of the Culinary Historians of Boston and the author of a truly marvelous book, which you should all read. It's
Thank you.
And I say that absolutely with great enthusiasm. It's Of Sugar and Snow, A History of Ice Cream Making. It won the 2010 IACP Award. That's the International Association of Culinary Professionals. She's also written another marvelous book, Pudding, A Global History. You'll really like to read that one too. And Food on the Rails, The Golden Era of Railroad Dining, a great topic as well. Is your mouth watering? Yes. She's currently at work on a book on a really dreary topic, dessert. So I think we have something more to look forward to. She has fond memories, she tells me, of standing in line at Steve's in Somerville for ice cream with hot fudge rather than mix-ins. She also stands in line at Toscanini's for burnt caramel ice cream. Tonight, Jeri will talk about the history of ice harvesting and ice cream making, and in particular about Bostonian Frederic Tudor and the way his development of a natural ice industry affected ice cream making and availability. And welcome, Jeri.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Can you hear me all right? The Ice King. Boston's Frederic Tudor, who was known as the Ice King, turned the ice from New England's ponds and lakes into a successful business. Tudor, who was born in 1783, was the first to imagine this could be done and to do it. At the time, if you wanted to have ice cream, you had to have ice. You had to freeze your ice cream mixture in a container holding ice and salt, then stir it until it was ready. But ice was not easy to acquire, even in New England. You needed a place to store it if you wanted it to last longer than a cold spell. You needed an ice house. If your property included a pond, you might be able to build an ice house. Lakeside inns and restaurants might have ice houses, and they might sell a little ice to local residents from time to time. But for most people, ice was not available, and ice cream was not an everyday treat. In 1777, a New York confectioner advertised that he had ice cream almost every day. Frederic Tudor helped change all that. The Tudors were a prominent Boston family. They had a house on Court Street in Boston, as well as a farm called Rockwood in Saugus. Frederick's father, William Tudor Sr., graduated from Harvard, as did William Jr., not Frederick. Frederick dropped out of school at 13, became an apprentice to a shopkeeper, quit his job, lived at the farm in Saugus, and basically chilled. Sorry, I just couldn't resist. However, there was a pond and an ice house at the farm, so he knew how to make ice cream. When Frederick was 17 and his brother John was 19, they went to Cuba. John had an injured knee. He actually was much sicker than that, and we don't really know what the situation was. But somehow the family thought that putting this boy, the sick boy, on a boat for a difficult sea voyage to an uncomfortably hot country would help him recuperate. It didn't. And shortly after returning to the US, sadly, he died. But being in Cuba had given Frederick the idea that people who lived in such a hot climate would benefit from having ice, and he began making plans to be the person who would deliver it to them. The prospect attracted more jokes than investors. No one thought it would be possible. But Frederic sent 2 of his other brothers ahead to prepare the way. He managed to get enough money to buy a boat. He had ice harvested and packed 80 tons of it in the ship's hold, insulated it with hay, and set sail. The Boston Gazette reported on his adventure and suggested it might be a slippery speculation. Tudor reached the island of Martinique in March 1806 after a voyage of 21 days, and most of the ice was still intact. However, his brothers had not provided for an ice house. They had spent their time on various islands trying to get exclusive rights to sell ice because Tudor thought the key to success was having a monopoly. So when Frederic got to Martinique, there was nowhere to store the ice, which began to rapidly melt. So, being an innovative guy, he talked the owner of a restaurant called the Tivoli Garden into making a mixture for ice cream and said he, Tudor, would freeze it. The owner was skeptical, but he did it. And then, according to a letter Tudor later sent to his brother-in-law, quote, "The Tivoli man received for these creams the first night $300. After this, he was humble as a mushroom." I love that phrase. The local newspaper was impressed and wrote, "It will be a remarkable epoch in the history of luxury and enterprise that on the 6th March, ice creams have been eaten in Martinique, probably for the first time since the settlement of the country, and this too in a volcanic land lying 14 degrees north of the equator." The trip was not a financial success, but it proved that ice could be shipped long distances and ice cream could be made in tropical climates. And it taught Tudor important lessons. From then on, wherever he introduced ice cream was part of the sales pitch. He also gave bartenders free ice initially, so they could offer their customers iced drinks at no extra charge. Once people tasted the chilled drinks, they were only too happy to pay for more, and the bartenders would then have to pay for more ice. But the ice cream was actually more important, and Tudor wrote, quote, "The creams are the first great object, and thereafter cold drinks." He also made sure there were always ice houses ready and waiting for his ice. Still, the business was precarious, and Tudor had to borrow money to continue. When he couldn't repay his loans, he landed in debtor's prison and had to borrow more to get out. He had weather problems, there were shipwrecks, shipping embargoes, but through it all, he persevered. He finally turned a small profit in 1810, so it took him 4 years. He also pursued other ventures unsuccessfully. According to a book called The Ice King, Frederic Tudor and His Circle by Carl Seberg and Stanley Patterson, which, by the way, was published by the Mass Historical Society, the Tudor family was, quote, "always chasing after a fortune slightly out of their reach." Frederick's father lost money speculating in real estate and spent more money running the Saugus farm than it ever generated. Rockwood was an apt name for the farm. Frederick's unsuccessful enterprises included a coal mine on Martha's Vineyard. Can you imagine how that would be greeted today? Graphite mining in Sturbridge, and investing in coffee futures. He lost roughly $200,000 in his coffee investments in 1834. Ice was the only venture that finally made him rich, and eventually, Tudor was able to ship ice from Boston to India profitably. However, and I think this is really critical, more than cold winters went into the ice business. Yes, winters were colder then, but that was not the reason he was successful. Tudor and his associate, Nathaniel Wyeth, continually improved the way ice was harvested and transported. Tudor came up with a process he called sinking the pond. When ice wasn't thick enough to harvest, he would drill holes in it and let water wash up over it to create a thicker layer and another thicker layer so it would double or triple and get the ice thick enough to actually harvest. Originally, he cut irregular chunks of ice, but they didn't store or ship well. Wyeth came up with a horse-drawn ice plow that first marked out and then cut the ice into uniform blocks so they could be harvested in less time for less money. They stacked more efficiently in ice houses and ships' holds, and they melted more slowly. The men improved the design of ice houses. They experimented with different methods of insulation, including using sawdust from Maine's lumber mills, which previously was just a waste product. They did not simply rely on nature. Of course, competitors came along. Some of the Tudor-Wyeth implements were copied by local blacksmiths, and other people began harvesting and shipping ice. One of my favorite stories about other harvesters was a company that cut ice from Wenham Lake, north of Boston. And in 1845, they shipped it to London and displayed a large block of ice in a shop window in London. And much to the amazement of passers-by, the ice never melted. Well, what they didn't know was fresh ice was being substituted from time to time. But as a result, Wenham ice became so renowned that a lake in Norway was renamed Wenham Lake so its ice would sell more profitably in London. And locally here, ice merchants began building storage units so they could deliver ice from door to door. People bought ice boxes, which confusingly are often referred to as refrigerators. When they had what we would think of as refrigerators, they first called them mechanical refrigerators, but you see ads for ice boxes labeled refrigerator. At any rate, the cost of ice came down. Ice cream making equipment also improved, and all these improvements, cheaper ice, ice boxes, better ice cream makers, all made it easier and less expensive to make ice cream. Cookbooks in the latter half of the 19th century were filled with ice cream recipes. Street vendors sold ice cream for pennies, much to the dismay of the elite confectioners. They called the street vendors' products, quote, frothy, watery slop and slush, and still viler flavorings whose makeup is only known to the devil's chemical emissaries. As for Tudor, he became rich and successful, finally. In his later years, he spent time in Nahant, where he had a cottage. Not one to simply go to the seashore to relax, he built an amusement park there. Of course, he charged admission, 5 cents for adults, 3 cents for children. Nahant residents were admitted free, except on Sundays. For once, this enterprise was not designed to be a big moneymaker, and it wasn't, but it was dear to his heart. The park's attractions included a dining hall, a tea house, rides, a witch house, and flying horses. Best of all, there was an ice cream pavilion. Tudor died in 1864, just 5 years after the park had opened. The ice industry he had pioneered continued to be an important one. In all, it lasted about 100 years. But in the late 19th century, ice was beginning to be made artificially. At first, using ether, the equipment had the unhappy habit of exploding. But eventually, the process was improved, and artificially made ice became a viable product. Not everyone believed in it, though. The president of New York's Knickerbocker Ice Company didn't. He said, the cost of manufacturing such ice precludes the prospect of ever bringing it profitably into competition with ice formed by nature's own hand. But here in Boston, the women of the Boston Cooking School knew better. In an 1894 issue of their magazine, The New England Kitchen, they wrote, "Today, in most large cities, we are offered a choice between natural and artificial ice at about the same cost. The probability is that every year manufactured ice will gain a stronger hold, for there is a constant increase in the demand for ice because of the larger population of the country, and the same cause interferes with the natural ice supply." Of course, more ice, whether mechanical or natural, meant we got to have more ice cream.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Our next speaker was scheduled to be Judy Herrell. Oops, sorry. And we're sorry she's not able to make it this evening. We are very delighted, however, to welcome Steve Herrell here to be with us. Steve, many of us need no introduction to Steve Herrell of Herrell's Ice Cream and of Steve's Ice Cream. I certainly don't. We were talking a bit earlier and mentioned to him that Keith, my husband Keith, and I and our son lived up the street on Elm Street from Steve's Ice Cream. What a terrible temptation that was for the 5 years we were there. Steve is, of course, really the innovator behind the ice cream crave that took over the city of Somerville and the Boston area in the 1970s and 80s. He's the inventor of the mix-in. Oh dear, I wish you hadn't. And the smoosh-in. And flavors like, just horrible flavors like cookies and cream and Heath Bar Crunch. Oh, just terrible. They are, of course, staples of today's ice cream scene. He'll talk this evening about the ice cream revolution, which it truly was in Boston in the 1970s and 80s, and also about the history of Herrell's ice cream, and give a short overview as well of Nancy M. Johnson and her hand crank ice cream batch freezer to illustrate how low overrun ice cream making happens. And we welcome you very much to our presentation.
Thank you. It's great to be here tonight before the society. My partner Judy Herrell, as mentioned, was supposed to be here delivering this mini lecture tonight. Well, she is in the hospital. She'll probably be fine. It's probably an ulcer. But at any rate, she emailed me her her speech a few hours ago, and I've had a chance to look it over once or twice. So here we go. There's some third person in here and some description of myself as the third person. So it might be a little odd, but we'll give it a whirl. The first thing she has at the top is explain overrun and how it works with no further notes. So just very briefly, overrun refers to the amount of air in ice cream. Almost all ice cream has some air in it. The more it has, the less quality the ice cream is, generally is thought. Supermarket half gallons, although they're not half gallons anymore, is at least half air, and the good quality ice creams are much less than that. If you have less air, you have more substance. It takes longer to melt, it takes longer for your mouth to dissolve the mixture, and it stands up better to milkshakes, it stands up better to hot fudge, and so forth. It's higher quality. There's more ice cream to it than there is when you eat air. So, moving on to her next point, it's about a woman named Nancy Johnson, an American, in 1843, took out a patent on a hand crank ice cream freezer. And I think, as Jeri was saying, previous to that time, ice cream was generally made using two bowls, the lower larger bowl with a mixture of ice and rock salt in it, and it's not in the notes here in part of the subject to be covered, but the reason ice is melted with the addition of salt is a very kind of, sounds easy. You throw ice down on the icy side, you throw rock salt down on the icy sidewalk and it melts the ice. But it's pretty complicated kind of a chemical procedure involving ions and so forth. So, but the liquid that is formed in that case is much colder than the ice itself. Don't ask me to explain that. It could be like 0 degrees Fahrenheit or 4 degrees Fahrenheit generally. And that is what can freeze other things that are adjacent to that bath of ice and rock salt. So you have the lower bowl, and then you have a smaller bowl that has the cream mixture in it that you submerge partially into the larger bowl, and eventually the mixture will freeze, but you have to keep stirring it, and you have to keep pushing down the crystals of the product that freeze first on the walls of the inside of the smaller bowl. So it's very laborious and sometimes doesn't seem to work too well, or you forget about it and it turns into an icy concoction, and it wasn't easy to do. So Nancy Johnson invented this contraption which removed most of those problems. And you all probably have seen a freezer, a tub, usually wooden, and then inside there is a metal canister, and surrounding the metal canister is the ice and salt bath, and inside the canister is a thing called a dasher or scraper that you turn with a crank so that the ice cream is, as it just forms on the inside of the canister, it keeps getting scraped off. And you want ice crystals to be small in ice cream, so that helps assure that the crystals are small and the ice cream is smooth and not icy. She invented this. She took out a patent, and I have a diagram of the patent, which I'm going to pass around, and the only known portrait of Nancy M. Johnson on the back later in life. So I'll just pass those around. This photo is from courtesy of the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., and it's the only known photo of her. So, but she deserves a lot. She should have had a lot of photos taken of her, because her innovation was just, it immediately made it possible for the average citizen to make ice cream at home instead of only the landed gentry. And thousands of these freezers were produced and sold, and it still used natural ice from the frozen lakes and ponds, because in the 1840s, mechanical refrigeration that Jeri alluded to had not yet been developed. Mechanical refrigeration meaning generally electric refrigeration, a continuous compression evaporation system, which is another very complicated thing, but it's also very underrated. It's so much a part of our lives we don't even think about it. In our refrigerators and freezers and transportation, trucks, rail cars, and air conditioning in theaters and malls and shopping and everywhere. It just it's really changed our life when we don't think much about it. But at any rate, over a period of maybe 30 years, from about 1870 to 1900, mechanical refrigeration was developed and improved and improved. There's no one inventor. And finally, in the early 1900s, most ice cream was made with mechanical refrigeration, and it made Nancy Johnson's freezer in 1840 was the first major step towards ice cream being made more often and more available by more people. Mechanical refrigeration in the early 1900s just took that and blew it all up, because now ice cream could be made very easily and in large quantities and transported and sold almost everywhere. So, Judy says, over time, during the age of mechanization, larger equipment was invented using fast-moving parts which whipped ice cream up into an airy, light, but tasty ice cream. It was less expensive to make, and all commercial equipment available for ice cream making was built to those high overrun specifications at that time. In other words, making ice cream with the hand crank freezer, you have a very low air content product. But during the early to mid 1900s, with mechanical refrigeration available, ice cream makers began to figure out, hey, we can really beat this thing up while it's freezing. We can whip it around and it will incorporate more air and yield a product with a high overrun. And they could make more money because if a quart is half air, air doesn't cost too much. So that's what happened. And then over a period of time, I'm getting way far from her notes, but but we'll see. I do go out on tangents sometimes. Okay, so let's just leave it at that right there. Like in the 40s and 50s, ice cream was kind of going downhill. Now, Brigham's Ice Cream and Bailey's Ice Cream, coming back to Boston, were ice cream parlors which became popular following the soda jerk fountain era. I'm not going to go into that. Both of these establishments were popular for decades, and these ice cream parlors had a long history. Bailey's adhered to an old-fashioned decor such as marble counters and metal dishes, while Brigham's was a bit more modern and served their ice cream in stemmed glassware like the fancy parlors of years past. Located in the Boston and Cambridge area, they served basically mid-overrun ice cream. They included some flavors with nuts and chocolate, like chocolate chip or maple walnut or butter pecan, along with coffee, chocolate, vanilla, strawberry, and fudge ripple. They serve sundaes, milkshakes, dishes of ice cream, and other ice cream concoctions. In the late 1960s, there was a guy who moved to Boston area, took a job as a cab driver, and who enjoyed an ice cream sundae for lunch almost every day. Judy has a degree from the College of Exaggeration. Quite often, at the Brigham's in Harvard Square, Cambridge. This guy's name was and is Steve Herrell. He grew up making ice cream with his family in Washington, D.C. with a hand crank freezer, and he thought he could do better than Brigham's and Bailey's. 1973, Somerville, Mass. Steve Herrell opened Steve's Ice Cream. Steve's attracted media attention and very long lines because of the handmade, rich, creamy ice cream he was serving in his shop. Steve mechanically altered and slowed a commercial ice cream batch freezer's motor to make it behave like Nancy Johnson's old-fashioned hand crank freezer, creating a low overrun ice cream, something folks had not enjoyed commercially for many decades. So it was something that seemed new and a great innovation at the time, but it was really a return to the very high quality ice cream of a long time ago. Steve's ice cream making method introduced the concept of gourmet, artisan, super premium, whatever you want, ice cream for sale in a shop for the first time. She means as opposed to making it home. He also introduced the method of customization and personalizing ice cream desserts by using the mix-in concept, which was smushing popular name brand cookies and candies into a scoop of ice cream on a laminated slab at the customer's request, and in turn revolutionized the then stagnant ice cream industry. Steve Herrell invented flavors like cookies and cream and Heath Bar Crunch, which are now staples in the ice cream world. MSNBC travel leisure journalist Tom Austin credits Herrell for this innovation milestone in the ice cream industry. Quote, "Modern gourmet ice cream is widely considered to have been born at the original Steve's Ice Cream in Boston." I would not include that if I were writing this. You know. But I'm not complaining, am I? Steve's Ice Cream inspired many other people to copy its methods and start their own businesses. For example, during 1974, two guys named Ben Cohen and Jeri Greenfield from Vermont spent some time at Steve's eating ice cream and watching the White Mountain commercial batch freezer making ice cream in the storefront window. The two men were captivated by the machine, trying to figure out why the dasher was moving so slowly and considering whether that was the reason for the rich, creamy ice cream they were enjoying. Finally, Steve spoke with them about his business concept. They mentioned to Steve that they were thinking about opening their own ice cream store in Burlington, Vermont, and Steve was supportive of their proposed business venture. They opened Ben and Jeri's in 1978. Steve, Judy, Ben, and Jeri are still friends today. Steve sold Steve's Ice Cream store and the trademarks in 1977 to Joey and Nino Crognali, owners of an ice cream parlor from down the street. Joey and Nino took on a partner, Jim Miller, Steve's former attorney from the sale of Steve's, and they franchised, opening about a dozen new stores. Then they sold Steve's to Integrated Resources, a large company listed on the New York Stock Exchange. 1980, Herrell's Ice Cream. 3 years after Steve sold Steve's to the Crognali brothers, he opened Herrell's Ice Cream in Northampton, Mass. In 1980, because he had realized that he enjoyed the ice cream business too much to stay out of it. There's more to this, but cutting to the chase, Judy writes. A lot more. Because of Steve's knowledge of ice cream making and ingredient usage, he was able to duplicate and maybe improve upon his original formulas. Opening day was September 8, 1980, nearly 37 years ago. Steve's trademarked new terms like smush-in to replace mix-in, and with his partner Judy Herrell began to branch into other frozen desserts, inventing No Moo, a dairy-free frozen dessert, and a line of no sugar added ice creams. Because of the fact that so many copycats were trying to duplicate the Steve's mix-in and smush-in ideas, Herrell's also began to simply incorporate cookies and candies directly into ice cream. What she means is that other places were making Heath Bar Crunch and cookies and cream and Reese's this and so forth, that they would come into the Herrell store in Northampton and expect us to have Heath Bar Crunch, and we would have to tell them, well, we don't make that, but we can mix the Heath Bars into vanilla. And they kind of like, well, you should just have them. Is that my time? Okay, you're up, Gus. I can't finish talking about how wonderful I am. So we started making those flavors of ourselves, able to be served right away. Still using a small batch freezer, which produces 3 gallons at a time, all of Herrell's ice cream continued to be fresh and made on the premises, not in a large factory. Herrell still uses only RGBH hormone-free dairy products and continues to support sustainable farming practices as they have for over 35 years. From the beginning, Herrell's has had a no food waste policy, which we continue. We have always been allergen conscious and have alerted our customers to allergens and have protocols to deal with allergy concerns. Today, these issues have come to the forefront and have become important to consumers, but Herrell's was thinking about these things over 30 years ago. Continuing with the theory that people, in some sense, like to play with their food, Steve and Judy have created over 375 flavors of ice cream, no moo, no sugar added ice cream, frozen yogurt, sorbets, and sherbets. Herrell's also has 8 flavors of hot fudge sauces, 6 of which are jarred for retail sale in grocery stores such as Whole Foods Market. After 42 years in the ice cream business, Steve Herrell retired in 2014, turning over all operations to Judy. In 2017, Herrell's completed a renovation moved all production to a kitchen adjacent to the store. This is the store in Northampton. We also have one on Long Island in Huntington. Moved all production to a kitchen adjacent to the store, and Herrell's kitchen became kosher certified. This allowed Herrell's more room in its service area to nearly double its daily ice cream offerings and segregate its dairy products from its non-dairy products. It also offered Herrell's the opportunity to serve all of their both dairy and no-moo dairy-free baked goods at one time. Also make dairy-free baked goods, which had not been possible since 1993. Steve's and Herrell's inspired hundreds of ice cream companies and continue to be innovators in the field of frozen desserts. We continue to believe in the old adage, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. And by the way, you hear more and more these days, the proof of the pudding, it's in the proof is in the pudding. But no, you have to eat the pudding too. The proof of the pudding is in the eating, and promise to provide our customers with the freshest possible, greatest tasting product available. So those are Judy's lecture notes, and I have one little comment to make, which is that since I've retired, I have written a book of my entire history and life in ice cream, and I've completed a manuscript. It's probably in printed form 250 or 300 pages. There's 100 photographs, and it goes into quite detail on many of these subjects. So I hope you look for it. I'm just at the point of finding a literary agent and a publisher, so it's probably going to be another year or so. These things take a lot of time. So it's probably, my working title is Ice Cream and Me by Steve Herrell.
Cool. Lovely. That's great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, that was really a treat. And we look forward to the book as a treat as well. Our next speaker is Gus Franca Torre. He grew up in New York City and New Jersey. He moved to Boston to finish his undergraduate degree at Boston University. He got a job at Steve's Ice Cream in Somerville, which became a full-time job and, as we now know, the start of a notable career. He worked with Steve Herrell and Joey Crugnali, who with his brother Nino, as Steve mentioned, bought Steve's and expanded it before selling the company. Gus then opened Toscanini's Ice Cream. Oh dear, why did he do that? In 1981. Toscanini's, as I think we probably most of us know, is located in Cambridge and has been rated best ice cream in Boston for multiple years by Boston Magazine, along with being highly rated by all kinds of intelligent people and publications. Gourmet, the New York Times, Serious Eats, Huffington Post, the Boston Globe, and many more. Toscanini's, as you may also know, is world famous for burnt caramel and other gourmet flavors. Its ice cream is available in many locations, including Whole Foods and the Harvard dining halls, if you happen to be in either of those locations. Gus will talk about his influences and the current state of ice cream innovation, and we welcome you, Gus.
As we just heard, I came to Boston to finish my undergraduate degree at Boston University, and I was living in Allston, as many people were, and I think Steve was living in a group home, which was sort of this common arrangement, seemed to be inspired by hippies and San Francisco's Summer of Love. And one of the other people who lived with me was teaching in Somerville, Massachusetts, and she would come home and say that there was a place in Somerville that made its own ice cream, and that they did other strange things, and she thought everyone would really like it. And with great assurance, I said to her that was impossible, but she insisted that I go off and visit Steve's Ice Cream. And so early on, shortly after I came to Boston and shortly after Steve opened, I became a regular customer at the store on Elm Street. And one of the reasons why I liked the store so much was you could put as many chocolate chips in any flavor as you wanted to. And chocolate chip was one of my favorite ice cream flavors and remains one of my favorite ice cream flavors. I grew up in New York and New Jersey, and in New York you could then, and as is now, you could get almost anything you want to eat, but it wasn't a very good town for ice cream for some reason. There was vanilla, there was chocolate, and there was strawberry. And I remember the first time I encountered chocolate chip ice cream on a visit to relatives who lived north of Boston, and I was utterly fascinated. So when I discovered that I could get double doses of chocolate chips at Steve's Ice Cream, I was hooked. And I was going to Boston University when colloquially they screwed up my financial aid, and I had to get a job. And in fact, I shortly had to turn a part-time job into a full-time job. But I was over at Steve's Ice Cream eating chocolate chip ice cream, and there was a sign that said help wanted. They needed someone to clean up the store. Ah. Thank you. And so I applied for a job. I was interviewed by Steve, and I started out as a cleanup person and then progressed to becoming a server, and eventually I learned to make ice cream. And I never graduated from university, although it doesn't bother me too much. And I worked at Steve's Ice Cream for under Steve and also under Joey and Nino Crignali, who Steve sold a business to. If you go down to the lowest level of the Davis Square subway stop, there's a timeline. And the timeline's kind of a very routine timeline. And I think it says something like 1654, first European settlers arrive in Somerville, Massachusetts. And then it says 1973, Steve Herrell opens up Steve's Ice Cream. Have you ever noticed that? Have you ever seen that?
I've heard it there. I myself.
It's kind of comical, but I actually think it's very accurate. It's accurate for two reasons. One was that the opening of Steve's Ice Cream signaled the beginning of Somerville's gentrification, or a change where Somerville went from being a very pugnacious blue-collar neighborhood to sort of a junior varsity version of Cambridge. But perhaps more importantly, even than Somerville's transformation, was I think that Steve did a lot more than return ice cream making to its initial roots, that it represented a kind of a broader change, one of the first examples of a broader change of turning away from industrialized food production. And that Steve's Ice Cream in Somerville could probably be linked with Maytag cheese in Iowa and Anchor beer out in San Francisco as early examples of people trying to reclaim food as an artisanal purpose with different virtues. And so it's not just that Steve spawned ice cream stores that can now be found in almost every college town in America, but that all these people that make artisanal bagels and artisanal cupcakes and do this and do that, and broadly speaking, try and serve food that's healthier and maybe has more integrity, owe a big debt to this first store. And it's something that I don't think gets emphasized enough. It wasn't just an ice cream store, it was part of a broader movement. Then I stayed on after Steve sold the business, as did a few other people who are here in the audience tonight. And he sold the business to two immigrant brothers who owned a small competing store in another part of another square in Somerville. And then they in turn sold it to a company that you could probably accurately describe as a very stupid rich company, Integrated Resources. And Integrated Resources managed to screw up the whole thing. The people who did best by imitating Steve's Ice Cream were Ben and Jeri. And we used to look at some of the early packaging because the imitation covered everything. Early Ben and Jerry's pints had a picture of a guy who was Ben, or looked a lot like Steve, around a ice and salt freezer in front of a player piano. Remember those pint containers?
Yes, I remember.
And
It's ridiculous.
it was
Ridiculously annoying.
yeah. But also, Ben and Jeri were the most successful players in this kind of strange guys and dolls ice cream war that was going on in Somerville. And that's Joey and Nino ran an ice cream store called Joey's Ice Cream in Teal Square, Somerville. And I think that one of the reasons why Steve might have entertained their offer to buy Steve's Ice Cream was they had not been as obnoxious as some of the other competitors. There was one guy, Fred, we might remember.
We called him the snake.
There you go. And Fred told stories all the time that were absolutely infuriating, and he always seemed capable of finding a soapbox or something. So he'd be on the radio, or he'd be in the Real Paper or the Boston Phoenix, implying that everybody else was using powdered mixtures or Kool-Aid, and that he was the only guy who was making real ice cream. And one week he was a Central Square ice cream store, and the next week he was a Harvard Square ice cream store, and always he was an obnoxious competitor. There was one thing that happened during this that wasn't really very funny. There were two men who ran I think it was a Baskin-Robbins on Charles Street, who were concerned that the opening of another alternative ice cream store, I think it was a Fred's or a Kelly's,
I think it was Fred's.
was
Yeah.
going to ruin their life. And they snuck into the Fred's ice cream store, to the store that was going to open, and firebombed it. And they failed to get out of the building before the firebomb went off, and one died immediately, and the other man died after going to the Shriners Burns Institute. That was sort of the low point of the Boston ice cream war. But there were more ice cream stores in Boston. I think there might have been 5 or 6 hippy-dippy ice cream stores in Harvard Square. And there was, when Steve opened the store, there, in addition to Bailey's and Brigham's, there was Baskin-Robbins, and there was Friendly's, and there was Howard Johnson, who was a major figure in mid-20th century ice cream production. He'd started in Wollaston Beach down in Quincy. For some reason, people in Boston eat a lot of ice cream. And there's this factoid that I have never seen proven, that people in Boston eat more ice cream per capita than anybody else does in the United States. I'm not sure where that fact comes from. No one's ever asked me how much ice cream I make. I don't remember anyone ever approaching Steve's Ice Cream when I was there saying, how much ice cream are you making? Because independent ice cream stores in Boston collectively make a lot of ice cream. But I think it's probably, there's no firm footing for that, but I think it's probably true that people in Boston eat a lot of ice cream and that they talk about ice cream a lot. And the theory, I have 2 theories about it. One is that because Boston has so many college students, and they're mostly affluent college students at private colleges, they can afford to eat pretty good ice cream, but they can't afford to go out and eat steak dinners all the time. And because most of these affluent colleges are fairly rigorous academically, Boston's not a hard drinking party school like some other college towns that you might think of. And so the other reason is that some theorists believe that in the cold climates, people eat a high-fat diet to stay warm. And that might also be true. I do remember that the week before I opened Toscanini's Ice Cream, I was standing on a corner in Harvard Square in a snow flurry, and I looked to my left and I looked to my right, and there were people eating ice cream cones, and made me feel somewhat optimistic that things were going to work out. So in 1981, I opened an ice cream store in Central Square, Cambridge. And I was fairly sure, thinking back to a class I'd taken at McAllister College, that the ice cream store should be near a college or university. And I looked around at Boston University, and I looked at Northeastern, which I think Northeastern was and still is the biggest campus in Boston. And Boston University is a very large university with a lot of affluent students. But they both had obstacles to locating an ice cream store there. Huntington Avenue was kind of a frisky neighborhood at the time, and I didn't really feel comfortable there when I went over to look at it. And Boston University is located in a neighborhood that once consisted of car dealers, so most of the commercial spaces are fairly large. You're looking at 10,000 to 20,000 square foot stores. Ice cream stores are comfortable in 1,000 square foot locations. So almost by default, I ended up near MIT. And I think that worked out for us, and I hope worked out for the neighborhood. Being near MIT suggested avenues that we could pursue that were somewhat different than other ice cream stores. MIT is a very international university, and from the moment we opened, we were confronted with customers from all over who often had suggestions and requests. And so over the years, Toscanini's has differentiated itself from other ice cream stores by making flavors from other countries and other cultures, and occasionally other parts of the United States. One of the flavors that someone was looking for before we started this event was Grape Nut Ice Cream. Grape Nut Ice Cream is a very curious flavor because it appeals to two distinct groups that I suspect rarely talk to each other. Grape nut pudding is eaten by northern New Englanders and people from the Atlantic provinces of Canada. And grape nut ice cream is a very popular flavor with people from the Caribbean. And the biggest ice cream store in Jamaica puts grape nuts in everything. I don't know why grape nuts are called grape nuts. They're not a grape, they're not a nut. I started putting grape nuts in ice cream because shortly after I opened the ice cream store, I would wander the aisles of supermarkets trying to find things that I could put in ice cream. And grape nuts are almost indestructible. And so when I put grape nuts in ice cream, they retain their integrity. But the key factor was, shortly after I started making grape nut ice cream, cab drivers would pull up, park illegally in front of the store, and come in and get grape nut ice cream. And they taught me to add raisins sometimes, and other people would suggest that we put cinnamon in it. And this is another kind of discovery where you're finding something that the customers already know. Then we had some assistance from an Indian professor at Harvard who helped us develop some South Asian flavors that over the years became more and more popular. But I remember the first time that I made saffron ice cream, I described it as tasting like the inside of a vacuum cleaner. And I was fairly sure that it would never become a popular flavor. But now we always have some Indian flavors on hand, and we've also made Italian flavors like nocciola and gianduja and tiramisu. We've started making Japanese flavors. We make a flavor called black bottom pie that's from Alabama and Mississippi. We do a lot of different flavors, partially because we listen to our customers and we take suggestions. And we're still making new flavors, as I think Steve is, and most of the other ice cream stores that I know partially maintain their enthusiasm by constantly coming up with new flavors, usually at the request of customers. I don't know if anyone else has any questions about anything they've heard tonight, but I'd be happy to answer them, and I think everyone else here would be.
I've got a question about Howard Johnson's and what your take would have been on Howard Johnson's and how important it was. It's kind of, reported to be today this important place which did elevate ice cream, but maybe you would disagree. So how would you, going back to the 20s and up through the 60s?
Do you remember Howard Johnson?
Sure, yeah. I guess I can take a shot at that. I think Howard Johnson's was important. I like to go to Howard Johnson's. I grew up in Washington, D.C. and Maryland area, and I think that there were more in that area than there were, as I remember coming to Boston. There's the one in Concord, I think. I don't know why they went downhill. I think their ice cream was, in retrospect, kind of a mid-grade at this point in time. Sort of not real bad, but not really great. And 28 flavors? Come on, you can do more than that. They made such a big deal about 28 flavors. Always the same, always the same. The public likes some variety and some new flavors once in a while. But hey, you can't argue with their clam strips, right? So, yeah, go ahead.
What I recall from the research is that when they started out, he was making really high quality ice cream, and it really seemed to mean a lot to him. Over time, of course, they expanded and had the motor inns and restaurants and all of that, and I believe that his son took it over when he retired, and over time it became more important to expand and be profitable than it did to maybe making high quality ice cream. At least that's the way I recall. So I think it just, I think it started out better, and the 28 flavors, it seemed to be a big deal early on, but not after a while. So it was one of those that started out high quality and slid down the hill.
I remember a story that my father told when he came here from Iowa for college, and he took his father and mother to Bailey's in Cambridge, where, as I recall, am I right at this, the signature was a ice cream sundae with the toppings spilling all over. And his father, my grandfather, was so upset because he thought this was just wasteful, because he'd grown up in the Depression and beforehand, and he had, for instance, learned how to eat ice cream cones by nibbling off the bottom of the cone so it would drip very slowly and be lasting. But I remember hearing that story and remember Bailey's from my childhood, but it was what Steve did, what Toscanini's and others have done, is seem to emphasize the ice cream rather than the creation of the sundae. Is that something you consciously did, or is that something that just came about as you were putting more effort into the ice cream and didn't need to cover it up so much? Did you find, as people came into the Somerville store, that they were looking for something like Brigham's or Bailey's, or were they happy with what you had?
Well, first of all, regarding Bailey's, those sundaes, I also had hot fudge sundaes at Bailey's besides Brigham's. And they had, you're right, the metal dish sitting on a saucer. And I think their concept was to fill the dish with ice cream and then have the hot fudge and other toppings just like droop all down onto the saucer, and that was supposed to be really cool. I thought it was kind of cool. And actually, I wondered if that little thing that we put our teacups on, a saucer, is that where it got its name? Because it was supposed to collect the sauce? Anyway, but on opening Steve's, you are right. I love the whole nostalgia kind of ice cream parlor with marble tops and sweetheart chairs and chandeliers and waiters dressed all in white with a towel over their arm, and that's great. But my concentration was on form, on a substance over form. That was sort of my mantra, that I just wanted the ice cream to be great, and I wasn't so concerned about the dishware and the chandeliers and so forth. That's where I put my concentration. Also, it was just sort of informal and homey, like down home. I wanted it to be like homemade ice cream in the backyard. So I think that you picked up on that correctly. Do you have a comment on that, Gus?
No, I'm in agreement with that. I mean, Bailey's, I thought, was sort of measured extravagance. It was a little bit messy, but it wasn't an astounding amount of fudge sauce. There's that place out in Newton that also gives you too much ice cream, Cabot's, and they always give you like a pint and a quarter, and the lid doesn't stay on and it melts while you're trying to eat it.
Yeah. Well,
It was something that I don't think either Steve or Toscanini's was interested in. We mostly concentrated on the quality of the ice cream, making unusual flavors.
Regarding that style of ice cream parlor, that was really from the 20s and 30s, I think, is that what happened, I think, and Jeri can correct me, is that the ice cream phenomenon in the USA got some impetus from the alcoholic prohibition, which was from, I think, 1920 to 1931. And instead of going to a bar or a nightclub, people started to go to the ice cream parlor for a treat and to socialize. And during that period, the ice cream parlors became very ornate and very fancy, and this whole concentration on the marble top and the soda fountain and the guy with the white hat and very special concoctions came to life at that time. And but that sort of dropped, I don't know if it dropped by the wayside. There's still ice cream parlors like that, but that isn't the concentration so much these days. But it's very nostalgic to think about and see those photographs.
You know, this brings back nostalgia, I guess, for everybody. I'm from Chicago, and in one of our neighborhood places made rainbow cones. Have you ever seen this? They were put on with a spade, five colors, all piled up, and they had a big neon sign out on the street. That combination of flavors was kind of interesting to me as a child. Have any of you ever tried combinations?
They like a rainbow sherbet that you see in New York, and rainbow sherbet's water ice, very inexpensive.
Oh, well, this was part ice cream, and I think the orange was always our orange sherbet, but
So the ice cream was rainbow, it wasn't the cone itself.
no, the ice cream, there were 5 flavors, 5 colors.
Okay.
Yeah, and you didn't get to choose, you know, it was the standard 5, but, okay, just a
No,
comment.
But I do know that some ice cream parlors, I think, still make ice cream sodas with mostly white with colored syrup coming up on the sides of the glass soda cup.
I see. No.
It's just very pretty. It sounds
Well,
like
there
kind
was
of the
no
same
syrup
thing.
on this, but. Thank you.
Can I make another comment quickly about something that we raised before? And that is this whole question about people in colder climates eating more ice cream than in southern climates. And it just is true. I tried to research this for my book. I spent a week, I think. And there's various lists of who produces and who consumes the most ice cream, both by state and by country. And they're kind of like, the way they gather their data is like mentions on social network or, you know, production facilities in that county or what. But there is kind of a overall general conclusion that one can draw that people eat more ice cream in colder climates than they do in southern climates. And nobody really has the final answer for this. Gus mentioned that, we need to eat more butterfat in colder climates to stay warm. That's a good theory. I have a theory that regarding the ice, the frozen ponds and lakes, or in the northern climates, people had more ice. You had to have ice to make ice cream during most of history until about 1900. So they had the capacity to make the ice cream with the rock salt, and they did, and they enjoyed it, and they ate it more, and it got more ingrained into the culture of the northern climates. We talk about it, we make it, we borrow recipes. In the South, this wasn't going on. So I just feel like it's more ingrained in the culture of the northern areas.
Great.
This is probably, thank you for the program. I do want to make one final comment about Bailey's, just because this is a sort of a funny story. When I grew up, I spent a lot of time in Bailey's, and people remember the elaborate chairs and the marble tops, and it was very pretty. But there was also a lunch counter there, and the guys who worked at the lunch counter were relatively gruff and sort of, they didn't want any extra business. So once I was there, and I was in line, there was a group of people in front who obviously were visiting the Boston area, and they were sort of hemming and hawing and trying to decide what to get. And finally the person said, well, I just want a milkshake. And the person behind the counter took a glass of milk, put a top on it, shook it up, handed it to him and said, this is Boston, we call them fraps. So Bailey's was charming, but it wasn't without its somewhat gruff appearance occasionally. So anyways, I'd like to thank you all very much for coming. It was a wonderful presentation, and thank you all for visiting MHS.
It was a pleasure.